John.
Hey, George.
Are you there?
Yeah, how are you?
Not good.
What's wrong?
We were burglarized. My office. Probably $8,000 worth of computer and camera equipment.
Oh my God! Was this while you and your wife were both gone, or?
Yeah, no, we were home.
You were home while your house was
that's what's really
burglarized?
scary. Yeah, we woke up in the morning and, often I'll get up, check my email. The computer connection wasn't working, and I figured, well, I probably need to reset the router because we've been having some spectacular lightning storms, as we usually do this time of year, and sometimes the router gets scrambled. So I go upstairs to my office, and before I opened the door, I could see through the window that some drawers were pulled out onto the floor, and then I looked, and I bought 2 weeks before I bought a new Mac Pro computer with two 20-inch monitors.
Oh,
all
no.
gone.
Oh, God.
All gone. And
does insurance cover that?
Yeah, with after the deductible and
but that's a huge pain.
Oh yeah, and there was I had, but not both of my digital cameras were on my desk. They took those. They took my iPod Touch. They took my cell phone. They went through all the drawers looking for other stuff. And all this happened while we were downstairs.
Wow, that while you're downstairs sleeping, so late at night?
Yeah, I guess we were asleep. Although actually, and this is even really weird. I have among my various ventures is the Santa Fe Review.
Yeah,
I comment
sure.
on local politics and especially land development issues. And a while ago, I put in a webcam that points out my window up to the top of this hill where Tom Ford, the fashion magnate, is building a huge estate.
Uh-huh.
And it was a very controversial decision to allow him to do this, and it involved some variations and things, and the neighborhood associations were opposing it. And I thought, well, I can see this out my window, so the whole world should see it too. So I put up what I called the Tom Ford webcam. So basically anyone could tune in through my website 24 hours a day and watch the construction. So they stole the Tom Ford webcam.
Oh, I thought you were going to say that you saw the burglar coming to your house on the webcam.
Yeah, I probably would have if I had it set up to save a video stream, but instead it just replaced the picture every 15 seconds.
Yeah.
So after the police left, I realized, wait, I can go on my website and find out the exact time that the thief unplugged the camera to steal it.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just after midnight. It was 12:05, and I think 40-some seconds.
That's all my years of living in New York, I have never been robbed. That must be really
it's horrible.
disturbing. Yeah.
Well, anyone who's gone through this, and I wrote a little bit about this in the Santa Fe Review, but the first thing your brain does is you immediately hear your left brain yelling at your right brain, trying to figure out some plausible thing like, I must have pulled that drawer halfway out and then gravity took over. Maybe there was an earthquake, or maybe I left a window open and it was really windy last night. This all happens in about a second, and then you realize, fuck, somebody broke in to my place, took my stuff.
That's interesting that you would look for non-human causes initially because you're so reluctant, I guess, to think that somebody could have invaded your space.
Well, yeah, and to come into a house, they had to come down our driveway, which means they pass neighbors' houses, because we're off the street. They would have to, walk up the steps to my office. They knew we were home. They had to, because both our cars were in the driveway, and we had the lights on till at least, not long before midnight. So they must have been casing the place. And
that's if burglars are busting into a house and they know that people are there, that indicates a certain degree of desperation.
I guess they were either very, very smart and just watched a long time and knew our patterns, and or they were very, very stupid and they saw. See, the way they got in is I left my bathroom window cracked open, which is not unusual. Usually, actually, I leave numerous windows open, and just to let the air come in at night, because it never occurred to me when we were home someone would have the audacity to break into the house.
You're going to get yourself a big dog?
No, I don't like big dogs, but
No.
but believe me, there's going to, if they try it again, they're going to be unpleasantly surprised. My 375,000 volt Rumkorf induction coil, I'm going to figure out a way to hook that up to the doorknobs.
Well, that could be the next GarageBand science experiment. You get a new webcam and position it in your office.
Yeah.
And have a motion sensor, and maybe you can capture the thief being electrocuted by one of your big spark machines.
That'd be great.
Oh man, that's something that would really go viral if you got it on the internet.
Yeah. Well, in addition, there's this whole identity theft thing, because the computer they took, basically had all of my records going back to at least 1996.
Jeez.
Every email that I'd saved, everything. Plus, they took the backup disk that was sitting right next to the computer.
God, this is like the Grinch taking every damn thing.
Well, yeah, so I had to cancel, my bank accounts and reopen them, my credit cards, my brokerage accounts. Just on the chance. I mean, most likely they were selling this thing as hardware, and someone will buy it, erase the drive, and have this nice new computer that he buys off the back of a truck, or it could land into the hands of someone who's a real expert in computer forensics and part of a criminal organization, and they could get into my account. So I had to spend a week doing all of that stuff. And fortunately, I had I had bought this new computer, and I still had my old computer, which is what I'm using right now, and that had all of my data on it up to about a week before. So I didn't lose anything myself. It's just that someone else has it.
Yeah.
Conceivably has it.
Oh, so you're good about backing up. I wish I was.
Oh man, I am, and now even more so. I've decided to do full backup offline, through the internet, through this Jungle Disk service with Amazon. And in addition, I've installed a network drive in a different part of the house, so if they steal my one backup disk, I'll have another backup. And yeah, you just got to do this stuff. And password protecting your computer is really not very helpful either, because all they have to do is they can steal your computer, see it's password protected, and then they just start it up, plug in a FireWire drive or a USB drive, start it up from another drive, and they have access to the computer anyway. So unless you encrypt your data on your computer, which you can do on the fly, which I may start doing that too, but you just don't want to live like that.
Or you could just get a big dog.
Yeah, I don't want a big dog.
Well, you can get a dog like ours. So we've got this giant curly-coated retriever, Merlin, and he's the sweetest dog in the world, but he's about 125 pounds, and he's got this huge booming bark.
Yeah.
And so any sane person would be terrified at seeing this dog come running out in the middle of the night at them. So we feel pretty safe.
But does he do that, like if you have friends coming over?
No.
Or
He's
a UPS
actually
driver? Or...
He's actually a complete pussycat. So the only time
But
he
good
barks...
at night. Well, that would be good, because too many dogs that I know around my neighborhood are like those cheap aftermarket car alarms. They go off if you blink at them.
Yeah, no, our dog isn't like that. He's pretty quiet, but like I said, he's just big. So we feel pretty safe. I'm sorry about that, George. That's
I didn't mean to get into such a long tangent, but it's kind of therapeutic, and so now I've been researching all kinds of things about security. Plus, I've been installing some things that I won't describe, but. So it's not going to happen again, but it's interesting, people's reactions. Getting a big dog, you're about the fourth or fifth person who suggested that, and only 2 people have suggested I get guns, which I'm not going to do. But maybe I shouldn't say that publicly,
No, leave them guessing. I think,
Yeah, leave them guessing, it's like the Cold War, so it's, maybe I will, get my father's old machine gun out of the garage.
Literally? A machine gun?
I'm not saying. Anyway, how was your week?
Well, actually, I just finished. It's one of these chores that I figure I should still do even at my advanced age. I just stained our house. We've got a cedar-sided house, and really it should be restained every 3 or 4 years. And it's a horrible, messy job. You're using this stuff that's got all sorts of toxins in it. It's an oil-based stain. It splatters all over you. It seeps into your skin.
Oh, it's horrible stuff. Yeah, I've done that, but not on that scale.
Yeah, I mean, our house is, it's got, it takes a while. It was basically 2.5 days to finish this, and it's been really hot here, and so I actually had to also go up to these high peaks on a extension ladder, extended all the way, and I'm sort of teetering at the top.
Oh, yeah,
and I'm thinking, why am I doing this to save a few $1,000s? This is really crazy. So I'm never going to do it anymore. But actually, I feel like I'm in an altered state, not in a good way, from all the mineral spirits and linseed oil and God knows what that's been absorbed into my body.
And all kinds of yeah. I think it's good to do stuff like that, though. And how often do you have to do it? Every 5 years, or?
I think I did it the last time about 3 years ago, because our house gets a lot of sun. I was actually just telling a friend of mine about doing this last night, and he said he sort of shook his head and said, "Old men on ladders, a bad idea." His brother-in-law, who's a physician, was just trying to reshingle his own house and was up on an extension ladder, and it slipped, and he fell down, and his face was completely crushed, and his skull shattered, and it, he lived, but it ruined his life. So that settled it for me. I decided from now on.
It's not worth. I don't think it's worth sacrificing your life for.
No.
Generally, I think it's good to do that stuff yourself.
Yeah, because it makes you feel.
I try to do all my own yard work, for example, and which can be considerable. And every year I think, I'm going to hire someone to do this. But then I think, well, I don't know. It's kind of. I really like loading up my Jeep with cuttings and taking it to the dump. It makes me feel a connection with nature.
Well, that's probably not too dangerous. There's certain things.
No.
Like I've got a chainsaw.
No, that's a whole different scale. That would be like me deciding to re-stucco the house myself. I lived out in Colorado, though, which I couldn't do anyway. And staining. I stained our tool shed in the backyard myself, and even that was a pain. And it was just a little shed.
I lived in Colorado in the late 70s, and out there was this real male ethic of self-sufficiency. So the ideal man was the guy who's living in a cabin in the woods and has built his house himself, and he can service his own car and doesn't need anybody to do anything. And I tried to fashion myself into that sort of person. So I had a Volkswagen, and I decided it wasn't running well, so I decided to take the engine out and rebuild the whole engine.
Oh, that's great! Yeah,
and of course,
Volkswagen, that was like a classic hippie thing to do.
But in my case, it was a very dumb idea because.
Did you have that book called "How to Fix Your Volkswagen for the Complete Idiot"?
Yeah, I had.
It was kind of a classic of the 60s, 70s. It was actually published in Santa Fe by John Muir Press.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
well, I think I did have that with sort of cartoon drawings.
I'm sure you did. That was whole part of this whole, kind of the hippie working man ethic.
Well, what I remember is I had finally gotten the engine block back together, and then I dropped a washer or a bolt or something into one of the cylinder holes.
Oh,
and so oh God, it was such a bummer.
So you had to take the head off again, and
I had to crack the whole thing open again to get that stupid washer out. So that was it for me. I decided, okay, I'm going to hire people who know what they're doing to fix my cars in the future.
It was a lot easier then too. I went through the same phase. I rebuilt a V6 engine on my GMC Carryall when I was still just toward the end of college. But I started it, and then I kind of got discouraged, so it sat in my parents' driveway. where I was doing the work, unassembled for about a year. But then I finally got my enthusiasm back. I put it all together, and actually, except for one false start where I think I had the timing chain on wrong, so the valve train wasn't synced right with the pistons, I redid it and started it up, and that was just the greatest feeling.
Well, you're much more mechanically inclined. I mean, the GarageBand science shows that you're good with gadgets. You're one of those naturals.
I guess it's because I'm so bad at sports. So this is how I make up for that.
So
I could never
anyway,
play hockey and things like that. But yeah, well, is there anything about science we wanted to talk about?
well, I'd like to just toot the horn of the Center for Science Writings for a moment. So I've talked before about how this guy that I work with, Suhas Sridhar, and I are trying to create an online archive of interviews I've done with various famous scientific folks over the years. And we've published a couple of little excerpts in the past, just a few minutes of audio with John Wheeler and Chandrasekhar, the physicist. And we just yesterday posted the full interview that I did with Thomas Kuhn back in 1991.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, so it's a monster. It's 3 hours. But I think of all the people I interviewed,
3 hours.
Yeah.
Thomas Kuhn, that's great.
And it was one of the best interviews I've ever had. He was such
I'm looking at it now. God, the splash
person.
page is great.
Yeah, Suhas came up with this design. He did a really good job. Tried all sorts of different formats, and finally came up with something that I think is very straightforward and easy to use.
Oh, wow, and you can just click on it right there.
So it's got the audio, and then we got a complete professional transcript of the whole
listen, I'm playing it now.
thing.
All I know is you were born in Cincinnati.
Sorry, I couldn't resist.
He's talking about, that's right in the beginning. I'm asking him about his upbringing in Cincinnati.
Cincinnati.
Which is how you pronounce it if you're from Cincinnati.
Yeah, I know nothing about Kuhn personally, just, of course, having read his structure of scientific revolutions. And
he was I think his philosophy, it reminds me a lot of yours. He was somebody who really didn't think it was possible for us to know the world through science.
Yeah.
That he actually, in the interview, says that he compared science to evolution. So it's wrong to think of evolution as evolving toward anything, especially toward Homo sapiens. He said you can only understand evolution as changing, as evolving away from something. And Kuhn thought that science, it's not evolving toward the truth. That's the wrong way to think about it. It's just always changing and evolving away from whatever we think the truth is at any given time. And that's
there
a
really
process.
is that ingrained teleological component to science. I mean, you sort of have to assume that you're converging asymptotically on the truth in some platonic sense.
And he really, I found it very hard to believe that somebody who knew science so well, I mean, he actually was trained as a physicist at Harvard before he switched to biology, and I found it very hard to believe that someone who knew science so well could have such a radical view of truth as being impossible
but he felt
to attain.
there was progress, though, right? That the models are pictures of we use for predictions. Our models of the universe become closer to the real thing, or
and there are these sort of pragmatic measures of progress, so we can invent cooler gadgets, and our predictive ability in certain ways improves. But he was adamant in insisting that just because one model does have greater predictive ability and leads to better applications and so forth, doesn't mean that it should be considered as truer than preceding models. And I thought
I didn't know that he went that far. Huh.
As I said, I mean, that was sort of the what I was really determined to get at in this interview, because I did find that, I absolutely believe that science converges on truth in some cases. There are certain areas where it does become all squishy and metaphysical, especially when you're talking about quantum mechanics and things like that. But in other areas, I think that science absolutely converges on the answer, the correct way of understanding a given
converges,
phenomenon.
but maybe never gets there. Converges towards.
Well, I think we've talked about this before. So let's say something as simple as resolving the shape of the Earth. That we now know it's not round, but as a philosopher, or a historian friend of mine at Stevens says, it's an oblate spheroid.
Right.
So that's not, there's no point in saying that that understanding is just sort of paradigmatic and it might yield to a different understanding in the future. I mean, we know that that's the right way of seeing things.
Yeah. On that level, I would agree with that.
What I think Kuhn, his model was psychologically very accurate. I thought he really had a deep understanding of the mindset of scientists, particularly in these periods of crisis when one paradigm is giving way to another. But in general, I think his model really fails to explain why you have some fields that rapidly converge on one model where everybody pretty much agrees what the understanding should be.
Yeah.
You get that, say, in nuclear physics or in molecular biology, and there's certain issues that are resolved once and for all. Whereas in other fields, you just get this endless wheel spinning.
Yeah.
And he didn't come up with a good account for why different fields progress at such different rates and have such different levels of agreement.
Well, it would depend on the complexity of the subject matter, right? I mean, something like in electricity, Ohm's law. Everyone very quickly converged on Ohm's law as describing the relationship between voltage, current, and resistance in a simple electrical circuit. So, there's not going to be a paradigm shift probably away from that. But then when you embed that into something bigger, like as a tiny detail of quantum electrodynamics, you could imagine, sometime in the future coming up with a system, maybe superstring theory, that would subsume all of these other things as tiny little details, but it wouldn't change their veracity, or at least their usefulness for prediction. It would just put them in this larger context. And it seems like when we get toward that, seeking these larger contexts, that's when there tends to be some churning, or a paradigm can conceivably collapse and be replaced by another. But it's just always something that's fascinated me. To what degree is our explanation, especially in physics and cosmology, how much of it is a house of cards, built on top of each other, and is it possible that something could happen where you would pull out the bottom card, it would all come down, and you'd have to rebuild it from scratch using entirely different concepts, basically carve up the universe at different joints than we're doing now. So we've talked about that before, and to me it's just the most fascinating question, and I guess I kind of careen one way and then the other on it.
Yeah, I guess what I hope that Kuhn would concede, and what I believe, is that there are, it's sort of the nature of science that it resolves one set of questions and then it moves on to another set. And so if you're just sort of examining what scientists are doing at any given time, it might lend itself to a kind of Kuhnian interpretation, because there's always a lot of disagreement on the borders, on the frontier of science. But then some of those questions that have been left behind have been resolved definitively. So you wrote a book about the whole question of whether of what these little nebulae in the sky were 100 years ago, and that question now has been resolved once and for all. I mean, there's no going back on that discovery.
I don't know. I don't think it's,
Really? You think?
Yeah, I mean, the idea that Andromeda, well, is a huge galaxy very, very far away instead of some small little swirling cloud of stellar gas that's much, much closer by. But, but this is all known indirectly through chains of inference, right? I mean, it's not like, we haven't traveled any further than the moon, and our space probes have gone just barely outside of the solar system. So it takes a great deal of audacity to speak with authority about what the nature of these nebulae are. And the chains of inference are very, very, very persuasive, but there's still some mavericks. Like there's still this guy, what's his name, Arp?
Oh, yeah, Halton Arp. I haven't heard his name mentioned in years.
One of the Big Bang says that redshift, still denies that redshift can be interpreted as a measurement of acceleration, and with the Doppler effect and all, and be used as a proxy for distance. That the redshift might be caused by some other means entirely.
Yeah.
In which case, maybe the universe is vastly smaller than we think it is, and the galaxies are much, much closer by and therefore much smaller. But, that's one maverick. But it's just always good to remind yourself how we know what we know or what we think we know, and that it's not like we can step outside the system and say, oh, there's the Milky Way over here, and then there's Andromeda over there. We're kind of stuck inside the system we're trying to explain.
Yeah.
So we can only really explain it in terms of our own neural architecture and our own observations.
Well, see, one thing that made Kuhn's view so radical was that he thought that, he was sort of a cultural determinist. So he said that, Kant and Darwin, he called himself a post-Kantian Darwinian or a post-Darwinian Kantian or something like that.
Yeah.
And by that he meant that he thought that Kant and Darwin, both in their different ways, suggested that we have some sort of a priori innate categories for understanding the universe.
Right.
And this is kind of related to Kuhn's concept of the paradigm. But whereas Kant and Darwin both thought that these a priori categories for sort of understanding are innate and fixed and universal, Kuhn thought that they constantly change as cultures evolve and as language evolves.
Yeah.
And so that there is no possibility for universal understanding of any phenomena.
Yeah, so where do the a prioris come from? It's kind of what I called filters in Fire in the Mind, this idea that we see the universe through this neural mesh, and our brain sorts it into different categories and patterns, and we see patterns, but we also see patterns when there aren't really patterns because we impose them, and that any science has to be kind of an intersection between the universe as it really is in the Platonic capitalized sense and how our brains happen to evolve on Earth, which was not for the purpose of understanding the universe.
Well, and I think that even with your view, you can still accept that given that we all have this shared neural architecture and to a great extent a shared biology, we can come up with some universal ways of understanding reality. And I just thought it was fascinating that Kuhn rejected that. Yeah. And I brought up the possibility, and he was rejecting the idea of a universal language also. He said languages are ephemeral and change through time and change as you move from one society to the next. And so I brought up mathematics as a kind of universal language. Yeah, that's what I was going to ask.
What's his whole thing on the unreasonable effectiveness of mathematics?
Well, he said that mathematics is just syntax without semantics and has no meaning attached to it.
Well, yeah, it's the one big tautology that as Jim Holt was putting it, where
right.
It's all just a fancy way of saying A equals A with all these kind of scenic side trips.
Well, so Kuhn thought that mathematics doesn't really get you out of this bind. I mean, in a way, it was a very kind of mystical way of looking at reality. That reality will always transcend our. Well, mystics always emphasize that reality is beyond the reach of language. Ultimate reality is beyond the reach of language.
Oh, I
and
believe
that's basically,
that.
And that's what Kuhn was saying as well.
I think he's absolutely right.
Yeah, except that it is then, maybe ultimate divine reality or whatever you want to call it. But if you're just talking about things like what's the nature of those little gas patches out there, or does the AIDS virus really cause AIDS? And there are some of these really
I think you can believe what he said without becoming a postmodern nihilist or whatever you want to call it. You can believe that you can come up with science and models and explanations that really do capture something, at least on the surface, about this this unimaginable thing we're stuck in, this reality. But it's always going to overwhelm our abilities because we're part of the system that we're trying to explain.
Yeah.
Versus
what
creatures. But when I read Kuhn a long time ago, I was struck by the whole radical nature of it. It seemed to me, and then I kept hearing that Kuhn was complaining that he'd been completely misunderstood, that he wasn't, a postmodernist, and I don't want to. I may be misremembering what he said, but I thought he was trying to, put kind of a counter spin on the idea that this was, kind of this radical postmodern view of science. Is that wrong?
No, absolutely. That's what, in this interview, he spends a lot of time complaining about his fans and people who've just sort of taken his philosophy and run with it in directions that horrified him, and sort of extreme postmodernism. Some people were claiming that based on Kuhn, you could see science as just pure politics and power grabs. And that the empirical aspects of it really were secondary to the politics, and Kuhn was appalled by all that.
Yeah.
But I thought, he seemed to be sort of vacillating between expressing outrage that his philosophy was being interpreted in those ways, and then coming back to these statements that I think could reasonably be interpreted in some of these ways.
Yeah,
I mean, it was almost comical that he was talking about. I mean, his book really took off. It became very trendy. I actually went back into my files and I found a New Yorker cartoon. New Yorker. I'll hold it up.
New Yorker cartoon of Kuhn.
It shows two people at a cocktail party. This is 1975 New Yorker. This very curvaceous woman talking to some lecherous-looking old hipster, and she is saying to him, "Dynamite, Mr. Gersten, you're the first person I ever heard use paradigm in real life." So everybody started using the term paradigm, and actually, I wrote a profile of Kuhn that came out in 1991, and I said that the low point of the abuse of the term paradigm came when the first Bush White House called its economic package the new paradigm.
Ooh.
And I said obviously it was just the new paradigm was just warmed over Reaganomics. And then I got a letter from the White House. This is one of the high points of my journalistic career. The guy said, "This is from James Pinkerton, who's actually a Blogging Heads pundit now.
Yeah.
Deputy Assistant to the President for Policy Planning. He says, as a great admirer of Thomas Kuhn, I was very interested to find your profile of him and his ideas in the May 1991 issue. However, the Reagan's characterization of the new paradigm as old Reaganomics is incorrect. It's not a rehashing of Reaganomics. It's a coherent set of ideas and principles that emphasize choice empowerment and accomplishing more with less centralized control.
Yeah, and it sounds really great if you call it a paradigm, too.
Yeah,
new paradigm. So what's the difference between a paradigm and an ideology if you're using it like that?
Yeah, ideology has sort of
a bunch of ideas connected together, and then it gets to be a paradigm. And,
right.
Yeah.
But Kuhn was sort of saying that he actually had this phrase. He writes this book, and all these people are, according to Kuhn, completely misinterpreting his intentions, and so he wrote an afterword for Structure of Scientific Revolutions, trying to explain what he'd really meant, and he wrote a whole bunch of papers trying to correct all the misimpressions, and it didn't do any good. And then he finally gave up, and he said something like, if you've got a bear by the tail, at some point you've just got to let go.
Well, I'm looking forward, and I wish he would finish it, Kay Davidson's biography of Kuhn.
Yeah.
I mean, come on, Kay, finish this book. We're waiting to read it. It was supposed to come out 2 years ago, and then it keeps getting delayed because Kay is such a perfectionist, and I'm sure it'll be a fine book. But wow, years.
I hope I can entice him. I hope I can entice him into writing a commentary for our website, for our archive.
I bet you can.
So,
in fact, we should get him on Blogging Heads.
We
He's
should.
so shy, though. We can try.
We'll find out when it's coming out. Yeah,
I'm
but
look
even
here
shy
on Amazon
authors
to see if they're announcing it again.
Shy authors have to get. They have to get over the death of truth. That's what it's called.
Yeah. We talked about this before, actually, and the
That's
subtitle
right. I'd forgotten.
is Thomas S. Kuhn and the Evolution of Ideas.
Right.
Yeah, it was due to come out February 28th, 2006, and now it says currently unavailable, and it still hasn't been published.
Oh, but Kuhn would hate that title, I bet.
Yeah, well, but it sounds like he might, have conflicted feelings about it.
So, all right, what else have we got today?
Yeah, you mentioned something about, before we leave Kuhn, I've been wanting to read, I just looked up the title. I have it on my shelves, but I've never cracked it open. It's his book, The Copernican Revolution. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Planetary Astronomy and the Development of Western Thought. I just wonder something like that might be a better way to really get a deeper sense of what he was saying than, or rather, what am I trying to say? To strip off all the layers of other people's interpretations of structure of scientific revolutions and see what he's actually saying when he talks about the Copernican revolution. I mean, I remember that's woven through structure, I think, but...
Yeah, Kuhn was, he was talking up some other books that he'd written and that he thought in some ways were superior to Structure of Scientific Revolutions.
Well, there's one called The Road Sense Structure, Philosophical Essays, an autobiographical interview.
Well, the books that he was referring to were not collections of essays, but were dedicated to particular periods in the history of physics. And he said that they were really pretty much ignored compared to structure. So again, it's sort of like it's almost like William Shatner being completely defined by, he will always be the captain of the Starship Enterprise, and it's sort of a great blessing and a curse to be associated with one work like that. And that's sort of...
Yeah, so you miss out on black body theory and the quantum discontinuity.
That was it. That was the book that he thought was really his greatest work.
Oh, okay. So I'll read that. Oh, here's one I hadn't heard of. He co-wrote a book, according to this, with someone named Bruce Wheaton, called The Tiger and the Shark: Empirical Roots of Wave-Particle Dualism.
Uh-huh.
That sounds interesting.
Yeah.
I wonder if it's...
Never heard of
Kuhn wrote the foreword. Yeah. Amazon, they have a really annoying thing in their database system where someone shows up as a co-author and they actually just wrote the foreword to the book. But anyway, on to more maybe earthy themes.
Well, I don't know, I was looking for summer topics, and one that occurred to me was Lyme disease.
Oh, yeah.
So we're in one of the hot
spots. That's really a
spots.
problem because, this is when you really want to make a margarita and all the lines have this kind of scale on them from this Lyme disease.
What?
Just kidding. Lyme disease. Lyme.
Right.
Named after who? Aloysius Lyme or some...
It was this disorder was finally identified as a distinct disease carried by a particular set of bacteria in the mid 1970s by some doctors living in and around Lyme,
Connecticut, of course.
Connecticut, yeah. So, and I think Scientific American...
Yeah, bacteria, and it can be very debilitating, right?
Yeah, so, this is... I'd like to sort of harp on the limits of medicine, and medicine has done so much for us in so many ways, but there are these certain areas where they just seem to be completely inadequate to the problem. So, our house is in the woods here, and I go running almost every day, and over the last 15 years or so that we've lived here, I've pulled hundreds of ticks off myself. I mean, I don't do any of the protective stuff. I just figure I'll look for them when I come back and then just take them off me. But I've had some stuck in me, and I've never gotten the disease, but my wife Susie has gotten it, and our daughter has gotten it a couple of times. They had the classic symptoms, but as you know, what happens with some people is that they don't have the big bullseye around the tick bite and the joint pain and the flu-like fever right away, which is that those are the classic Lyme symptoms. There's some people who go for months or even years, and then the symptoms gradually come on, and then it becomes completely debilitating.
Chronic.
Yeah,
and like malaria, where it can flare up. But that's controversial, right? I mean,
there are a whole bunch of controversial aspects of it. So first of all, the tests for Lyme disease are pretty much inadequate. So now you're supposed to the tests are so bad that they're really looking just for those classic symptoms of the bullseye rash around the bite and the flu symptoms and so forth.
So
and then they don't
can't actually test and show that you got this particular bacteria?
The tests they have a lot of false positives and false negatives with the tests. And so they really are just looking for symptoms. I mean, there's still some places they offer the tests around here, but they're not very effective. And then what happens is that, so normally you get, as soon as they diagnose it, they give you a heavy course of antibiotics for a couple of weeks. And my wife had that, and our daughter, and the symptoms disappear, and then they're fine. But some other people have these symptoms that get worse and worse, and then it becomes really severely debilitating, where they get terrible fatigue, they get psychiatric symptoms that resemble schizophrenia in some cases, and then joint pain that resembles severe arthritis. And I know I was just at a lacrosse game of my son's recently, and I'm talking to some of the other dads, and one guy has had Lyme for about 6 months, and he said it was so severe that he was actually considering suicide a couple of months ago. Another guy has had it for 8 years. And he said that he's always just struggling with body pain and severe fatigue. And there's some doctors who prescribe these intensive, long-term courses of antibiotics, but there's absolutely no evidence that those do any good, and there is some evidence that they actually hurt people.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's obviously not a great thing to be chronically taking antibiotics for years and years. And it's completely controversial whether these after effects or long-term symptoms are actually caused by the Lyme disease bacteria, right? I mean, it's one of those many, these come up in so many contexts where there are people who are having these intense subjective experiences that are very hard to convey to someone who's not having them, and are convinced that there's a certain reason for them, and science can't really bear that out. But it doesn't necessarily mean that it's wrong, and how do you deal with that?
Yeah, there are these sort of shadow diseases. So
like chronic fatigue syndrome, where people say, well, I just feel really tired all the time, and I don't feel like doing anything, but some people just feel like that.
Right.
For all kinds of psychological reasons.
Well, it's become extremely politicized. So
oh, yeah. I was reading, after you mentioned that, I read the Wikipedia article, and some doctor who didn't agree that these people's conditions were after effects of Lyme disease, and he was stalked and received death threats.
Yeah, because it's a financial issue. So there's this group of people who claim that they have chronic Lyme disease and insist that they need these long-term antibiotic treatments to get rid of it. Then there are all these other alternative treatments as well, and they're insisting that the insurance companies pay for it.
Right.
And this guy named Alan Steer and a bunch of other experts have said that none of the studies show that these long-term treatments have any effect, and again, that there are some negative effects from them, and they're not even convinced that this chronic disease, or whatever it might be, it has been caused by the Lyme bacterium. So it's one of these medical controversies like autism and the possible link to
it's another one.
To vaccines, where it's just there's no middle ground. Pretty much anything you say, you're going to have people who vilify you.
Yeah, I wonder, has anyone ever done a study to show if there's any correlation, or how much correlation or overlap there is from people who during their lives have had these symptoms of Lyme disease aftermath, and that have also sought treatment for chronic fatigue syndrome?
Well, apparently,
and also maybe, have a relative who's autistic and are persuaded that this is, because of, related to vaccines or electromagnetic fields, or one of the other fringe theories.
Oh God, that's right, electromagnetic fields.
Well, see, that's what it is here. We don't have a Lyme disease problem out here, although we do have. It's conceivable you could get a tick bite and get Rocky Mountain spotted fever, but I haven't seen a tick for years and years. I think since I was a kid, and got one in Colorado, but so there's Rocky Mountain spotted fever, but that's really rare. I remember when I was a kid, I used to sit down and look in the basement and look at my father's old medical books, and there was a picture of someone with Rocky Mountain spotted fever. Pretty gruesome. But we don't have that. But what we do have people with these same symptoms, and they're blaming it on Wi-Fi. And they're saying, of course, there's absolutely no scientific evidence to support this. It kind of defies our understanding of physics. But of course, it's possible that there's some nature, to electromagnetic waves, non-ionizing radiation that's conceivably doing something that's causing symptoms in certain people. So they've kind of labeled themselves as hyper-electrosensitives, and it's actually a worldwide movement, or a worldwide fringe group, and they give themselves all this moral support. And see, this came up here recently because the city council had been delayed for more than a year. It seems like it was 2 years in putting Wi-Fi in the public library and in various city buildings, because this group of 4 or 5 people claimed that they had this debility called electrosensitivity, and that it was therefore discriminating against them.
Wow, that's
under the federal what's it called, the AD, the ADS, Anti-Discrimination Act. Why can't I think of what that is?
Well, this
must be my
sounds
Wi-Fi
like
router here.
well. So there's extreme chemical sensitivity. There are these people who say
people
that
people who are allergic to everything that's it's called a chemical.
Yeah, so if you walk by and you're wearing aftershave or perfume or something,
right,
they will break out in hives or
which. Yeah.
Well, you bring up I didn't realize that the electromagnetic controversy was coming back. Do you remember those articles in the New Yorker by Paul Brodeur, right?
Yeah, right.
Is that his
right.
name?
And it started out with power lines.
Yeah,
and cancer clusters.
Early 80s, I think,
related to power lines, which is low frequency, 60 hertz.
And it caused an uproar.
Yeah.
And, here it was in the New Yorker, which has this rigorous fact-checking, and it was really pretty bogus, but it took a few years for that to die down.
It did, and then when that happened, they moved on to higher frequencies. So first it was like, the special thing is that it's these low frequencies that have some kind of a effect on the body's internal bioelectrical rhythms, and then when that didn't pan out, then everyone got excited about higher frequencies, cell phones and wireless internet.
Yeah.
Which are all much higher frequency, like around 2.5 to 5 gigahertz, and that's been kind of revived in a big way. But there's just so much misinformation floating around. It's one of my themes I constantly harp on in the Santa Fe Review. But fortunately, the city, wasn't intimidated by this argument, and the Americans with Disability Act, ADA, that's what it was. So they were saying that this would violate their rights under the ADA, and then the city attorney pointed out quite correctly that the ADA doesn't cover just any kind of disease that you make up that you think you have. And it's hard to know. I mean, one of the people that's one of these big electrosensitive anti-wireless people is a physicist, a biophysicist at Los Alamos National Laboratory.
Oh, they got a lot of nuts at Los Alamos, though. They always have.
Yeah.
Remember the guy who they had?
He actually wears a chainmail kind of thing on his head to try to really. Yeah.
That's great. I remember I did a story at Scientific American on a program called Non-Lethal Weapons, and they had a huge budget at Los Alamos. I mean, it was many millions of dollars. They were looking into all these sort of stun guns and sticky foams and different ways of disabling people without killing them.
That sounds good.
Well, no, it was really interesting. We should actually talk about that at some point. But the guy who was the head of the program, of this multi-million-dollar program, had written I think he was a physicist, but he had written a book on how to use your psychic mind powers to get ahead in your job. And so I found this out, and I mocked him in this in this Scientific American article. And it was funny. I got all these letters that were really angry with me for being so close-minded about the possibility of psychic mind control.
Yeah. No, I hesitate, even during our conversation, to say anything critical about people who are persuaded to have this chronic Lyme disease symptoms, or even to a lesser degree, the electromagnetic symptoms, just because people get so upset about it, and you get some, just some really nasty email.
Yeah, and and you don't want to. I mean, some of these people are really suffering and miserable, and
there's definitely something that's causing this, and obviously it would be horrible and frustrating if medical science didn't have an answer for you.
Yeah, and then there are also, there's so many examples of this. There's the Gulf War syndrome, these sort of mystery diseases that are caused, that are supposedly occurring at higher levels among veterans of the first Gulf War. I'm not sure if the second Gulf War has an analogous problem. yet.
Yeah.
But he probably will.
Well, yeah, and there's disgruntled postal worker syndrome.
Yeah. Right. And then there's the Bermuda Triangle.
Yeah. But see, I guess the big issue is that you can't, you have to have some system for distinguishing, between syndromes or diseases that people are convinced with all their heart that they have, and the ones that society is willing to recognize and provide some sort of support for in the form of insurance payments or disability benefits. Because otherwise, anyone could say that they, had this horrible affliction where they're among a tiny minority of people who, whenever they, hear a sound of a certain frequency, at the same time they see a color of a certain electromagnetic frequency, that this causes something to go wacko in their bodies, and that they suffer miserably, and that therefore, they deserve to be protected from this, and to receive disability payments because these colors and sounds, occur, with great frequency in our society.
It's tough. I think the only way to resolve these things is empirically, but some of them
I think you kind of have to do it the way we're doing it, and it's always possible that, 10, 100 years down the line, someone will find out, wow, 5.5 gigahertz, even these really low electromagnetic signals actually cause this weird resonance in a certain group of ions in your cells, and then it leads to this obscure effect in certain people who have, these particular 37 point mutations in this chromosome, and it could happen.
The Google cloud computers could come up with these correlations that escape our puny human minds.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, the Google cloud computer. Boy.
Hey, I got a story. I think this is not too tangential, but it sort of captures my ambivalence toward modern medicine. So my son Mac, he plays lacrosse, and he was in a game at the end of the season. It was an away game, and I didn't go to it. So we get a call at about 6 o'clock from a emergency technician. She said that Mac was being taken to the hospital because something had happened. He'd hurt his arm, and it was pretty serious. And so anyway, they told us the name of the hospital. I drove over there, and I get there, and he's lying on a gurney, and there's definitely something wrong with his arm. His elbow, his right elbow, was all misshapen, and it looked like severely broken. He was in a lot of pain, but they gave him some drugs to dull the pain, and the nurse said she thought it looked like a dislocation of the elbow, but it could be a fracture. They weren't sure. They took the X-rays and confirmed it was a dislocation. We got an orthopedic surgeon in. He gave Mac some more drugs, and then just grabbed his elbow and jammed his arm back into the socket, and that was it.
Wow.
And so he's got some soreness. He can't extend his elbow all the way yet. He's got to do these special exercises. But it was just, they diagnosed the problem very quickly. They fixed it very quickly. They gave him drugs to numb the pain. So I was just so impressed and grateful to the people at the hospital. And then here's what happened. We were literally leaving the hospital. It was about 10 o'clock at night by this time. And my cell phone rings. I thought it was Susie calling. And it turned out to be this old friend of mine. And he said that his son had just been admitted to a psychiatric hospital. He was severely depressed and had tried to kill himself. And the doctors were recommending shock therapy. This is a 16-year-old boy. And my friend, he knew that I had written about shock therapy and wondered what he should do. And I just didn't know what to tell him. I mean, so I just finished this episode.
Boy, I thought they only use that in the most extreme cases, right? I mean, depression's so severe that it's just intractable.
Well, suicidal depression, that's
Yeah.
That's really...
But surely they don't recommend shock therapy until they've tried all the pharmaceutical.
I guess he had been on some pharmaceutical drugs. They were also saying that another alternative would be using Thorazine or some other neuroleptic, but those drugs also have severe side effects.
Yeah.
So we've just gone from medicine at its most competent, dealing with this, with my son's dislocated elbow, just doing a wonderful job, and all of a sudden here I am faced with this terrible problem of my friend, where you're in the shadow world of medicine, where it doesn't really understand the disorders, and there are no good treatments, let alone cures. Psychiatric illnesses are a prime example of that, but also all the other things we're talking about, Lyme disease and chronic fatigue syndrome and autism and the link to...
well, then there's the possibility that, that he was taking, Prozac, and, Prozac is supposedly, linked to suicidal thoughts among certain people, which, I find rather dubious, but, it's just such a muck. And then, and if you can just, fall into the medical assembly line, I guess, and, they start this treatment, and then they have to treat the symptoms of that treatment, and there you go, down the rabbit hole.
Stay away from them damn doctors if you can.
Yeah, but I like that. You just grab his arm, yank it, and they don't, they could have held him up for days doing all this ultrasound and laparoscopic surgery and things like that. And sometimes you just have to give the arm a good yank. And
yeah, it was great. And my son, he definitely felt a lot of pain during that part, but it would have been absolutely excruciating if they gave him a big dose of Dilaudid. So that took some of the sting out. Yeah, definitely. Anyway, medicine, performed some miracles, but it's still got a long ways to go.
Yeah.
Hey, we're over an hour.
I guess we've done it again, huh?
Another Summer Doldrums edition.
Yeah,
completed.
Wasted a perfectly good hour talking about science, sort of.
Sort of.
But it sure was fun.
Yeah, and burglaries and identity theft. And,
man, yeah, still dealing with that.
Well, good luck with that. I hope they catch the son of a bitch.
Yeah, they hardly ever do. That's the thing. But
yeah.
Anyway, as they say, learn and move on.
Yeah. Okay, man. So I'll talk
John,
to you.
It's good talking to you, and hopefully we'll do this again in a fortnight.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, John.